All right, so I have 5 articles for you today um, on the big, beautiful bill. Because the article that I found yesterday that I did a video on, I just didn't quite like how short it was. It just gave snippets. I mean, it was great that it told you about things that aren't talked about, but it didn't talk about things like taxes on tips or taxes on overtime. So it's not like it covered everything that is in the bill. That isn't the main concerns. So I found 5 other articles which, either don't require a sign in or don't constantly run an ad over the freaking article so you can't actually read it. And, for those who are looking for 2 sides of this argument, it's like, oh, there's got to be something good in this bill. No, there doesn't. Just because in a lot of cases there are 2 sides to a story doesn't mean everything has that. I mean, there is in the sense that this bill might benefit some people, mostly rich people, but it will benefit certain people. That doesn't mean, though, that makes it good. So, let's start with CNN Business. Here's who stands to gain from the big, beautiful bill and who may struggle. And just spoiler alert, the people who are already struggling are just going to struggle more. All right. President Donald Trump has promised that the big, beautiful bill passed by Congress will be one of the most successful pieces of legislation in American history. Of course, the ultimate beauty of this sweeping legislation is very much in the eye of the beholder. The bill could end up boosting some workers and industries while others may be left worse off. Okay, so who's going to be better off? Corporate America. Big business groups, including U.S. Chamber of Commerce and Business Roundtable, applauded the Senate's passage of the bill on Tuesday. Corporations are betting they will benefit from the legislation making permanent the tax breaks in the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. The package would restore a tax break from the 2017 tax package that allowed businesses to fully write off the cost of equipment in the first year it was purchased. The incentive has been phasing out since 2023. Also, the legislation would once again allow businesses to write off the cost of research and development in the year it was incurred. The TCJA required that companies deduct those expenses over 5 years, starting in 2022. All right. Now, there was something I wanted to mention about that. Oh, yes. In touting the signing of this bill, people were like, oh, this is going to be great because, this will get the economy roaring. Okay, well, you're the one who signed these tax cuts into law in your first administration, and we didn't see a boom. So, what? Anyway, next up are manufacturers. Manufacturers are especially happy that the bill would make significant changes to how the U.S. tax code treats the construction of new manufacturing facilities. Businesses will be allowed to fully and immediately deduct the cost of building new manufacturing facilities. This temporary provision is retroactive to January 19, 2025, and continues for construction that begins before January 1st, 2029. And in a bid to incentivize more chip making in America, the legislation would enhance tax credits for semiconductor firms building manufacturing facilities in the United States. Oops. All right, small businesses and partnerships. The National Federation of Independent Business, the leading small business lobbying group, praised the legislation for making permanent a special deduction for the owners of certain pass-through entities who pay business taxes on their individual tax returns. That deduction, which applies to small businesses and partnerships formed by lawyers, doctors, and investors, would get increased in the House version of the bill from 20% to 23%. The Senate bill kept it at 20%. So, as you can tell, this was before the bill passed, I think. High-income Americans, which I think everybody and their mother has been shouting from the rooftops about this one. The net income for the top 20% of earners would increase by nearly $13,000 per year after taxes and transfers, according to an analysis of the near final version of the Senate bill by Penn Wharton budget model. Because, as we all know, it's the rich people who need to make more money. They need to keep more of their hard-earned money because it's not like the poor people need it. No, let's give more money to the rich because, maybe they need to buy a couple more yachts. Seriously, at some point, you have more money than you need. That amounts to a 3% average increase in income for those households. For the top 0.1% of earners, the average annual income gain would amount to more than $290,000, according to Penn Wharton. Americans living in high-tax states should also benefit because the bill temporarily increases limits on deductions for state and local taxes for households making up to $500,000 annually to $40,000 per year for 5 years. Because as we all know, it's the ultra-rich who need all the help. What the hell? However, millionaires who lose their jobs will not be able to collect unemployment benefits, according to a recent provision added to the Senate bill. Well, at least that. Workers who receive tips and overtime. Finally, we learn about this. Certain workers will receive an extra tax break through 2028. As I said, there is a limit to this. Employees who work in jobs that traditionally receive tips could deduct up to $25,000 in tip income from their federal income taxes, while workers who receive overtime could deduct up to $12,500 of that extra pay. Income limits apply, however. So it's not just, oh, goody, goody, we can now, not have to worry about paying taxes on tips or paying taxes on overtime. There are limits to that. Okay, so now let's get to the people who are going to be worse off. Low-income Americans. Many people at the lowest end of the income ladder would be worse off because the package would enact historic cuts to the nation's safety net program, particularly Medicaid and food stamps. Among the many changes to these programs would be the addition of federally mandated work requirements to Medicaid for the first time in its 60-year history, and the expansion of the work mandate in the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, the formal name for food stamps. Parents of children ages 14 and up are among those who would have to work, volunteer, take classes, or participate in job training to keep their benefits. Now, the problem isn't that that's a requirement because, well, most of the people on Medicaid already do that. Same thing with SNAP. It's not like this idea that if you're low income and you're on assistance, that must mean you're lazy. No, there are people who work who just don't make enough to live the way to live even remotely like they should. They don't make a living wage, so they need assistance. So my understanding is it's the paperwork that is going to screw people over, not the requirement per se, because again, most people do that. Now, the problem becomes that not everybody who gets Medicaid is of working age. There are elderly who get Medicaid. They get I think the way it works is they get their Medicare through Medicaid, I think. Or maybe they just didn't make enough to qualify for Medicare. But for whatever reason, they're elderly that are on Medicaid. So, what? You're going to make them either work or go to school or volunteer? They're elderly. They're probably either sickly or disabled. But even if they're able-bodied, why make them go through that? They already did what they were supposed to do, and they're trying to retire. They should be allowed to do that just because they have the crime of being low income. They shouldn't be forced to work until they die. Millions of low-income Americans are expected to lose their benefits because of the work requirements and the bill's other measures affecting Medicaid and food stamps. Notably, few of those dropped from Medicaid coverage would have access to job-based health insurance, according to a Congressional Budget Office report about the House version of the package. Of course, because, if you're not working, how could you get job-based health insurance? That's just not how this works. Those in the lowest income group earning less than $18,000 a year would see a $165 reduction in their after-tax, after-transfer income once the safety net cuts are taken into account, according to Penn Wharton. That's a 1.1% decrease. Because again, it's the poor people who need less money. Because that makes total sense. We should be paying the ultra wealthy, but the poor people should pay more, so the ultra wealthy can keep more. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. The next level, who earn between $18,000 and $53,000, would get a 30% bump in income, or 0.1%. Wow, that's just a huge percentage. My God. How will people will just be so shocked at all the money they're able to save if they're in that income bracket. Wow. Thanks, President Trump. We might get a penny back. What? Middle-income households would see their income rise by $1,430 or 1.8%. They earn between $53,000 and $96,000. The health provisions won't only hit low-income Americans. The Senate is also tightening verification requirements for the Affordable Care Act's federal premium subsidies, which could also leave some middle-income Americans uninsured. Now, before I continue, it's great that middle-income earners will get more money back. However, it's still pittance compared to what the ultra wealthy are getting in return. It's like, wait a minute, it should be in reverse. Because the less money you make, the more you actually need to survive. And the ultra wealthy, if they lose some money, they're not going to notice it. We're not asking them to cut their income by billions. These are billionaires. They're multi-billionaires. If they lose even $1 billion, they're still going to be freaking billionaires. It's not like they are going to miss out on a lot. So a lot of people use Obamacare. Both people and businesses rely on Obamacare in order to be insured. I used to work at a food pantry, and that's how they accessed health insurance for their employees. They did it through Obamacare because it's a nonprofit. So obviously, if they can get a good health insurance plan for their employees, but yet not pay through the nose because, again, nonprofit, absolutely they should go for it. So this is just going to hurt people. All told, the bill could result in more than 10 million more people being uninsured in 2034, according to a CNN analysis of the bill and CBO forecasts. All right, so now let's get into the next category of people who are going to be screwed by this bill. Hospitals. Hospitals are not happy with the healthcare provisions of the bill, which would reduce the support they receive from states to care for Medicaid enrollees and leave them with more uncompensated care costs for treating uninsured patients. And that will cause some rural hospitals to close. Actually, there was already one in Nebraska who, in anticipation of this bill passing and losing that Medicaid money, they decided, we have to close. The real-life consequences of these nearly $1 trillion in Medicaid cuts, the largest ever proposed by Congress, will result in irreparable harm to our healthcare system, reducing access to care for all Americans and severely undermining the ability of hospitals and health systems to care for our most vulnerable patients, said Rick Polak, CEO of the American Hospital Association. The association said it was deeply disappointed with the bill, even though it contains a $50 billion fund to help rural hospitals contend with the Medicaid cuts, which hospitals say is not nearly enough to make up for the shortfall. Sort of like the idea of, let's give new mothers $1,000 because obviously childcare will be completely funded with that. So, yeah. Anyway, let's move on to the next one, which particularly irks people like Elon Musk, and, that almost makes this shit worth it. Almost. The Senate removed a last-minute excise tax on wind and solar that experts warned would have been a killer for the clean energy industry. But, according to Trump, windmills cause cancer, so I guess he doesn't mind. However, the Senate bill still strips tax incentives for wind, solar, and other renewable energy projects by 2027 and gives developers stringent requirements to claim them. The American Clean Power Association slammed the legislation as a step backward for American energy policy that will eliminate jobs and raise electric bills. Electric vehicle makers could also be left worse off because the GOP bill ends EV tax credits of up to $7,500 at the end of September. Previously, those tax credits were scheduled to last through 2032, providing a powerful incentive for car buyers. The Senate version of the package would increase the deficit by about $3.4 trillion over the next decade, according to the CBO. Interesting how Republicans, when the Democrats are in power, are screaming at the top of their lungs about the deficit and how we have to manage our money better. But now they're perfectly fine with ballooning the deficit. Adding trillions to the debt risks lifting already elevated interest rates. That in turn will make it more expensive for Americans to finance the purchase of a car or a home and for businesses to borrow money to grow. Not only that, but higher rates would force the federal government to devote even greater resources to finance its own mountain of debt. Which I'm sure they will find a way to cut public programs even more, so poor people have even less recourse. The CBO expects U.S. federal government interest costs to surpass $1 trillion per year. U.S. spending on interest has already more than tripled since 2017, surpassing what the federal government's entire defense budget. Oh, good. It's cut off in the middle of a sentence. Yip, yip, yip. What the hell? Wow. I'm just looking to see, is there something beyond that I missed, but nope. Nope, that's the end of it. All right, so that is the end of that article. So let's move on to the next one and see what else we can glean. All right, this one's from Reuters. Trump tax bill averts one debt crisis but makes future financial woes worse. All right, let's see what it actually helps. President Donald Trump's tax cut and spending bill, which passed Congress on Thursday, averts the near-term prospect of a U.S. government default, but makes America's long-term debt problems even worse. Republican lawmakers in the House of Representatives approved the bill that will extend Trump's 2017 tax cuts, authorize more spending on border security and the military, make steep cuts in Medicare and Medicaid, and add trillions to the government's debt. Trump is expected to sign the bill into law. Again, this was written before he signed it, but at that point it was a foregone conclusion. As part of the tax package, lawmakers raised the U.S. government's $36.1 trillion borrowing limit that it was projected to hit later this summer by $5 trillion, a move that will assuage concerns over possible default on U.S. debt. An analyst had estimated that the so-called X date, when the Treasury would no longer be able to pay all of its obligations without an increase or suspension of the debt limit, could have occurred at the end of August or in early September. Longer term, however, the bill has largely been seen as bad news for the U.S. bond market and the nation's fiscal health. It will add $3.4 trillion to the nation's debt over the next decade, nonpartisan analysts have estimated. That would exacerbate concerns over additional bond supply and dwindling demand for U.S. Treasuries that have been a key driver of financial markets in recent months. The bill contributes to some of the structural concerns around Treasuries with respect to, number one, ongoing fiscal deficit and elevated debt levels, and number two, inflation, said Mike Medeiros, macro strategist at Wellington Management. BlackRock warned on Monday, that foreign buyers, what the heck just happened here? Oh my God, I just lost everything. What the heck? What just happened? Let me try refreshing and see if I can get it back. All right. Let's see. All right, here we are. BlackRock warned on Monday that foreign buyers, what is going on? Were already souring on American debt. There was a real risk that demand for the $500 billion in debt the U.S. issues every week will fall even more and push borrowing costs higher. We've been highlighting the precarious position of the U.S. government's indebtedness for some time now, and if left unchecked, we view debt as the single greatest risk to the special status of the U.S. in financial markets, BlackRock's investment manager said in a note. The bill is projected to reduce tax revenues by $4.5 trillion, reduce spending by $1.2 trillion, and cost 10.9 million people their federal health insurance over the next decade, according to estimates from the Congressional Budget Office. The legislation also stokes economic growth by allowing businesses to fully expense equipment purchases as well as research and development costs and provide other tax breaks. Some investors, however, worry the debt overhang could curtail the economic stimulus in the bill, which Trump refers to as the One Big Beautiful Bill. He doesn't just refer to it as that. That is literally the name of the act. Camp Goodman, fixed income portfolio manager at Wellington Management Company, said he expected the bill to add as much as 0.5% to economic growth next year, but that the market was too complacent about the long-term risk of higher borrowing costs. We believe the One Big Beautiful Bill will accelerate corporate earnings growth, which ultimately will drive equity values, said Ellen Hazen, chief marketing strategist at F.L. Putnam Investment Management. But this could lead to higher for longer treasury rates, making many fixed income investments somewhat less attractive over the longer term, she said. Benchmark 10-year Treasury yields were higher on Wednesday after days of decline, with the increase partly attributed to fiscal concerns agitating investors. Yields rise when bond prices drop. Andrew Brenner, head of international fixed income at National Alliance Capital Markets, said Wednesday's sell-off was a sign that so-called bond vigilantes Investors who punish bad policy by making it prohibitively expensive for governments to borrow were circling the market. The vigilantes want to see more deficit cutting. Their view is Trump and Congress have not done enough, he wrote in a note to clients on Wednesday. By raising the U.S. federal borrowing limits, the bill removes the low probability but high impact risk of a U.S. debt default, which could have catastrophic consequences for global markets. In recent weeks, the interest rates on some Treasury debt due in August had risen more than yields of short-term Treasury bills coming due around the same time, a sign investors were getting nervous about the approaching X-date. I think the passage of the bill takes some of the debt ceiling risks away, so yields on bills maturing in August might come down a little bit, says Vinny Blow, a director of fixed income capital markets at Raymond James in Memphis. Overall, the reaction of the bond market to the bill approval has been relatively muted. An expansion in deficits had already been priced in with Trump's return to the White House in January, and investor focus has shifted in recent weeks to economic growth concerns. To be sure, many market participants said the passage of the bill was secondary to other key market drivers. The benchmark S&P 500 index closed at a record high on Wednesday, lifted by gains in tech stocks and progress on U.S. trade agreements. I wonder what's going to happen in August then. A slowdown in economic data in recent weeks has also bolstered expectations for interest rate cuts by the Federal Reserve this year, contributing to optimism in stocks and bonds, although a blowout jobs report on Thursday dampened hopes for any immediate easing in monetary policy. It's not going to be the overall driving factor for the market, said Robert Pavlik, senior portfolio manager at Dakota Wealth in Fairfield, Connecticut. It's earnings first and then the Federal Reserve. All right, so that is the end of that article. So now let's move to an article from NPR. Trump on 4th of July signs one big beautiful bill to implement his agenda. Oh yes, and to show the symbolism of Congress giving up its power to Trump, Mike Johnson gave him the speaker's gavel at the signing. Because, that's not an ominous sign at all. President Trump on Friday signed a massive spending and tax bill that the White House has dubbed the One Big Beautiful Bill to implement much of his domestic policy agenda. Again, that is literally the name of the act, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, because they have to kiss Donald Trump's ass in every way possible. The bill passed Thursday after Republican leaders in the House of Representatives convinced holdouts in their own party to get in line behind the controversial legislation. I can say very proudly that our country is more proud right now than it has been in many, many years, Trump said during a military family picnic for the 4th of July. The last 2 weeks, there's never been anything like it as far as winning. You are delusional. The legislative effort fulfills key campaign pledges that Trump made during his re-election bid, including making hefty tax cuts, passed during his first term permanent. But it violates a key promise too. Trump promised repeatedly during the campaign not to touch Medicaid benefits, the joint federal and state program that provides health care for more than 70 million low-income, elderly, and disabled Americans. And that was the other thing I forgot to mention. Okay, so the requirement for Medicaid is to volunteer, to work, or to go to school. Okay, how do you expect the disabled to do any of that. I mean, yeah, they could go to school, but schooling costs money. And if they're on Medicaid, they probably don't have a lot to begin with. So why would they go to school for a job that they can't do? Very bizarre. Anyway, moving on. House Republicans passed the bill by a vote of 218 to 214, nearly entirely along party lines. All 212 Democrats voted in unison against the bill, and they were joined by 2 Republicans, Representatives Thomas Massey of Kentucky and Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania. Leaders were forced to work all night to win the votes necessary to pass the bill and meet Trump's demand to sign the bill by July 4th. Okay, 2 things. Number 1, Brian Fitzpatrick, after he voted against it, turned off his phone and left. Because he's like, I do not want to be bullied, I'm leaving. So that's number 1. And as I mentioned in yesterday's video with Lisa Murkowski, she let herself get bought. Oh, you're going to give pork to my state. Okay, I'll vote for your bill. It's like, Jesus Christ. I thought you were the one with principles. I mean, she even went so far as to consider becoming an independent and caucusing with the Democrats. This is not being an independent and caucusing with Democrats. I mean, what the hell? All right. House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, pledged in a speech on the House floor on Thursday that the bill would make the U.S. stronger, safer, and more prosperous than ever before. Because you are delusional. Today we are laying a key cornerstone of America's new golden age, he said. Johnson on Friday presented Trump with the gavel used on the bill during its passage. Again, nothing ominous about that. The sprawling GOP bill, clocking in at nearly 1,000 pages, represents a dramatic realignment of the federal government's role in American life, shifting resources from the social safety net and investments in clean energy and reorienting them to finance trillions in dollars in new spending on tax cuts, immigration, enforcement, and national defense. Trump was heavily involved in selling the bill to skeptical lawmakers. Trump also weighed in repeatedly on social media, demanding that lawmakers finish the job. Now, that's a very nice way of saying that Trump bullied people. Largest tax cuts in history and a booming economy versus biggest tax increase in history and a failed economy. What are the Republicans waiting for? What are you trying to prove? MAGA is not happy and it's costing you votes. And yes, that was in all caps. That's why I raised my voice. Trump wrote just after midnight on Thursday. Republicans say they are targeting waste, fraud, and abuse in the program, and the bill makes significant changes to work requirements and ways the program is funded. The Congressional Budget Office, a nonpartisan group of professional staffers who provide information and analysis to support the legislative process, estimates that the cuts could result in nearly 12 million people losing health coverage. Oh yeah, and about Trump breaking his promise, I'm going to actually be generous to Trump by calling him an absolute moron. Because it's entirely possible that what his advisors are telling him, he actually believes that they're cutting waste, fraud, and abuse and not actually harming people. And now that's a generous interpretation because let's face it, this is Trump. He doesn't give a shit about anyone but himself. So in the grand scheme of things, he won't care, but it's also entirely possible that he's being lied to. about what this bill does. It's entirely possible that he honestly thinks that either Medicaid is not being cut or that the cuts are just directed towards waste, fraud, and abuse, and that he has absolutely no concept of what it actually is doing. Democrats warned throughout the day and night that the legislation contains major cuts to the social safety net, including food aid and insurance coverage for millions of Americans. Before the vote, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, a Democrat from New York, spoke on the House floor for 8 hours and 44 minutes in a wide-ranging speech railing against Republicans and the impact of the bill. The speech broke the record for the longest leadership speech in the history of the House of Representatives. The previous record of 8 hours 32 minutes was set by then House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, a Republican from California, in 2021. During the speech, Jeffries read letters from people insured through Medicaid, including many who said they live in congressional districts represented by Republicans. Jeffries called the bill an immoral document. Everybody should vote no against it because of how it attacks children and seniors and everyday Americans and people with disabilities, Jeffries said. That is why I stand here on the floor of the House of Representatives with my colleagues in the House Democratic Caucus to stand up and push back against it with everything we have. Trump sought to respond to Democratic attacks against the legislation during his speech on Friday during the 4th of July celebrations at the White House. I just want you to know if you see anything negative put out by Democrats, it's all a con job, he said, adding that it was the most popular bill ever signed. Right, because he has absolutely no grasp on reality. The package also comes with a hefty price tag. The Congressional Budget Office estimates the bill will increase the deficit with how much money the government spends over the amount it brings in by $3.4 trillion over 10 years. These issues were the focus of significant debate during both Senate and House deliberations over the bill. The House passed an initial version in late May, although it changed in the Senate as lawmakers incorporated additional cuts to Medicaid and a higher increase to the debt limit. Now, let me just go back to what he said about Democrats and a con job. Not only that, he said that Democrats hate it, but hate him. And he goes, that's okay, I hate them too, because they hate America. I mean, this on the heels of a Minnesota Democrat being buried because some wackaloon murdered her and her husband, and he's totally MAGA. But we're going to fan the flames and say, I hate half this country. Now, even if that wasn't the takeaway, these are the same morons who had a problem with Hillary Clinton calling Trump supporters deplorables. Now, granted, she didn't call all Trump supporters deplorables, just half of them. However, I did not like it, even if it was true. If you want to be president, you really shouldn't be insulting your constituency. Even though, like I said, she was absolutely correct, and now as a private citizen, she could totally call them that. That's fine. But if you're running for president or are the president, you probably should be insulting the people you represent. But I'm sure none of the people who went absolutely apeshit over Clinton calling Trump supporters deplorables, I'm sure they're not going to have a problem with Trump saying he hates Democrats. Because obviously that's totally different because it's their guy saying it to a bunch of people they don't like, as opposed to having their whittled feelings hurt. All right. These issues were the focus of significant debate during both Senate and House deliberations over the bill. Oh, wait. I read that already. I think. Yes. Yes, I read that already. The Senate passed its updated bill on Tuesday and sent it back to the House, which then needed to approve the same text to move it forward. Much like in the Senate, House GOP leaders then had to work with conflicting factions of the conference to get enough lawmakers on board, particularly those concerned about Medicaid changes and conservative fiscal hawks who wanted to see more savings. Republican holdouts in the House slowly got on board with the bill earlier in the week. Before the vote, House Speaker Mike Johnson told reporters that many previously opposed lawmakers had needed a reasonable amount of time to understand the Senate changes. I gave them the space to do it, he said, adding, "The president helped answer some questions. We got cabinet secretaries involved and experts in all the fields, and they got their questions answered." Sure they did. Members of the conservative House Freedom Caucus, including Representative Ralph Norman, a Republican from South Carolina, echoed that sentiment on Wednesday in between discussions, telling reporters that the meeting with the White House was very helpful. "There won't be any vote until we get satisfied," Norman said, before ultimately announcing he would support the bill later that evening. "What I want to know is what actions we can put in place that the president and his team can do to make sure we have our questions answered." Yeah, he bullied them. However, when reporters asked Johnson Thursday morning about any potential executive actions the president pledged to take to address concerns from conservatives, the speaker said he wasn't clear on any details. "I know there was a lot of talk about how the bill would be implemented and what role the executive would have. I don't think they enacted a lot of specific commitments or concessions or anything like that," he said of GOP members after the vote. "It was just more an understanding of how they would interact." Johnson said he was planning to move another reconciliation package in the fall and in the early spring to address items that were not included in this package. Asked whether he was trying to win over Representative Brian Fitzpatrick, a Republican from Pennsylvania, who opposed the procedural measure to bring up the bill, Johnson said, "I've certainly tried to encourage him to get to a yes." The speaker admitted he had not gotten any sleep. "Can you tell?" he joked to reporters. "No, you sound just like you always do, so no." Final passage of the legislation came just one day ahead of a self-imposed GOP deadline to have the bill on the president's desk by July 4th. Trump has been a constant presence throughout the process for Republicans, pressuring members to strike a deal and threatening to support primary challengers to lawmakers who opposed it. Exactly. He bullied them because if he truly cared about convincing them as opposed to forcing them, he wouldn't threaten to primary them. I mean, that should be obvious. All right. So that is the end of that article. Let me see what else I have. Okay. How Trump's tax cut and spending mega bill would impact SNAP recipients. Okay, let me just make sure this is big enough for me to read. All right, the subheading. The estimated cuts to SNAP would total approximately $230 billion over 10 years. With the House of Representatives holding procedural votes on President Donald Trump's giant tax and immigration bill Wednesday, congressional Democrats and food security nonprofits are calling attention to its potentially drastic changes to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program that could cost millions of low-income families crucial food assistance in every state. Democratic members took to the House floor Wednesday after Tuesday night's nail-biter vote in the Senate, where Vice President J.D. Vance cast a tie-breaking vote, seeking to delay movement on the bill by offering an amendment that protects against any cuts to Medicaid and SNAP. Trump's fiscal bill would mark a massive overhaul of SNAP benefits, putting 40 million recipients, including some of the nation's most vulnerable populations, at greater risk of food insecurity. If they're on food assistance, they're already food insecure. All right. The federally funded program, once known as food stamps, issues electronic benefits that can be used like cash to purchase food. It is run by the USDA Food and Nutrition Service, which administers federal food assistance programs. SNAP helps low-income working people, senior citizens, the disabled, and others feed their families, the USDA states on its website. Eligibility and benefit levels are based on household size, income, and other factors. In its current form, the legislation would slash entitlement health programs including Medicaid and SNAP, which aims to help millions of lower-income Americans buy groceries every month to pay for Trump's second-term agenda. The bill would specifically force states to shoulder at least 5% of SNAP benefit costs, starting in 2028. Currently, the program is 100% federally funded. Additionally, the bill would tighten eligibility, raising the work requirement age from 54 to 64 and forcing parents with children older than 6 to meet the work requirements. Parents with dependent children at home are currently exempt from those requirements. Hold it. What? Okay. Now, the work requirement age from 54 to 64. Around 54, depending on your job, that's when people start to retire. Granted, I can't imagine people retiring if they're food insecure at 54, that they would probably... in order for me to get full Social Security benefits for myself, I would have to retire at 67. So, this part, I guess, doesn't bother me so much. Forcing parents with children older than 6 to meet work requirements. Isn't this the same crowd who screams that there should be someone at home taking care of the kids? And now you're forcing those same people to work? Okay. I'm confused. Right. Oh, there was something else I wanted to bring up. Oh, yes, about the making the states pay for more. Trump also wants to get rid of FEMA and have the states pay for their own disasters. But now that Texas is in a flash flood, specifically the county that voted predominantly for Trump, suddenly FEMA is ready and willing to help. Which, what? I'm pretty sure that if this was California, FEMA would just not be around. The SNAP cuts total an estimated $230 billion over 10 years. Republicans claim the cuts would target waste, fraud, and abuse in the entitlement programs and would save hundreds of billions of dollars over the next decade. Democrats and food security advocates disagree. Not to mention the Congressional Budget Office. In a letter on June 24th, Democratic governors from 23 states urged congressional leaders to reject any proposals that would put state SNAP programs at risk. The governor said the proposed cuts in Trump's mega bill would effectively gut the powerful hunger assistance tool utilized by more than 42 million food insecure Americans who are already facing rising grocery costs. Congress has proposed profoundly changing the relationship between the federal government and states by shifting unprecedented costs to states for the first time in the 50 years of SNAP's history, they wrote. Under this plan, states will need to find millions or even billions of extra dollars in their budgets or be forced to leave the SNAP program entirely, potentially cutting off millions of Americans from this vital assistance. And ironically, the people who are going to be affected the most are going to be red states because they tend to be poorer. And so they tend to be the ones with the most SNAP recipients and the most Medicaid recipients. So Trump is basically screwing over the very people who voted for him. Congress is forcing states into an impossible ultimatum. Either come up with new funding to backfill federal cuts or cut off families from essential food assistance, they continued. The idea that states will be able to respond to these massive cuts by backfilling with state resources is unrealistic. If states cannot meet the full cost share, they will need to cut SNAP enrollment or end their programs entirely. They added, cuts to SNAP will mean that millions of Americans won't get the food they need for their families, and it will result in too many Americans forced to survive rather than thrive. That's just a heading. The Food Research and Action Center, a nonprofit and nonpartisan research and advocacy organization, has urged the House to reject Trump's mega bill, issuing a press release Tuesday that described the legislation's passage in the Senate as devastating. In addition to extending Trump's 2017 tax cuts for the wealthy and raising the federal debt ceiling by $5 trillion, the bill slashes billions of dollars from the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, imposes time limits, restricts program eligibility, and shifts unsustainable costs to the states, Crystal Fitzsimmons, president of FRAC, said in a statement. The Senate bill takes away food assistance from millions of people in need and undermines the very promise of opportunity this country celebrates. Fitzsimmons noted that the legislation could force states with already overstretched budgets to make impossible trade-offs, including reducing public services, raising taxes, or cutting SNAP access for some or all. Beginning in 2028, states will be required for the first time to cover a share of SNAP food benefits, in addition to shouldering increased administrative costs. This unprecedented cost shift will require states to come up with millions of additional dollars to keep the program running, she said. Child nutrition programs such as school meals and summer electronic benefits transfer, or summer EBT, which provides families with funding to pay for their children's lunches during the summer months, could also potentially suffer at the hands of SNAP funding cuts, Fitzsimmons argued. Texas Governor Greg Abbott, for example, recently vetoed a budget measure that would have given his state access to the federal summer EBT program for 2027, citing concerns over upcoming state obligations to cover SNAP costs. Summer EBT requires states to share in the administrative costs to run the program, while food benefits for eligible recipients, families received $120 per dollar. Families received $120 per child are 100% funded by the federal government. The consequences are too serious to ignore, Fitzsimmons stated. The House must reject this bill and instead protect SNAP and other programs that are critical to building a nation free from hunger. City Harvest, New York's first and largest food rescue organization that provides free food for millions of food insecure residents, has also expressed concerns over the SNAP cuts. These cuts will have a devastating effect on New Yorkers and people across the country who are already struggling to put food on the table, City Harvest CEO Jilly Stevens said in a statement to ABC News. These unprecedented cuts, which are now one step closer to becoming law, would take away food from children, seniors, and working New Yorkers at a time when visits to New York City soup kitchens and food pantries are already at a record high. According to City Harvest, SNAP has helped 1.8 million New York City residents and millions more across the country afford the food they and their families need to thrive, Stevens said. For every meal that food banks provide, SNAP provides 9, she said. SNAP not only reduces food insecurity, but also a stimulant to the local economy. She added that food pantries, local partners, and the charitable food system cannot make up the gap in demand that these cuts would create. Stevens also noted that the bill would also eliminate SNAP-Ed, a federally funded grant program that serves as the primary funding source for City Harvest's nutrition and education programming, which she said gives people the skills and knowledge to prepare nutritious, budget-conscious meals with the free produce we provide. Chefs like critically acclaimed Philadelphia-based restaurateur and cookbook author Mark Vetri are also using their platforms to educate followers on the potential long-term risks of the mega bill SNAP cuts. Vetri took that message to Instagram this week, writing that cuts to SNAP and its education program funding are going to hurt so many people struggling to eat. In our SNAP program, we collaborate with school leaders to reach wellness goals with evidence-based hands-on cooking classes, school gardening curriculum, and fruit and vegetable promotion, he stated, referencing the Vetri Community Partnership, which he founded with restaurateur Jeff Benjamin in 2008 to educate kids on healthy eating habits. This is the furthest thing from waste. Knowing how to cook is a skill that can literally change a person's life and give them a skill that can keep them and their family healthy and well-fed by focusing on making healthy choices, he added, urging the need to rewrite a bill that makes sense instead of sweeping regulation that will hurt so many people who need it most. The James Beard Foundation, a nonprofit culinary arts organization, has also lobbied against the bill's cuts to SNAP. SNAP is one of the most effective tools we have to fight hunger, the foundation said in a statement on May 13th. Cutting it would be devastating. Chefs know what hunger looks like, it continued. They know the people who come through their doors and into their kitchens, and they know that when people can't afford food, our whole food system suffers, from the farmer to the line cook to the local restaurant. Okay, that's the end of that article, and I forgot to mention this is from not only ABC News, but GMA, Good Morning America. Okay, so the last article I have concerning the bill, blatant misinformation. Social Security Administration email praising Trump's tax bill blasted as a lie. Previously, a political agency lauds Trump's spending bill with false statements about federal taxes, experts say. An email sent by the U.S. Social Security Administration, or SSA, that claims Donald Trump's major new spending bill has eliminated taxes on benefits for most recipients is misleading, critics have said. The reconciliation bill, which the president called the One Big Beautiful Bill before signing it on Friday after Republicans in Congress passed it, includes provisions that will strip people of their health insurance, cut food assistance for the poor, kill off clean energy development, and raise the national debt by trillions of dollars. And they're not even adding all the money that goes to ICE, all the money that, what was the other thing I wanted to mention? There was ICE, there was something else I wanted to, that it didn't mention. Let me go through it again. I'm blanking. But again, these articles keep saying that Trump is just calling this the One Big Beautiful Bill when it's literally the name of the bill, because Congress has to kiss Trump's ass. But the bill also eliminates federal income taxes on Social Security benefits for most beneficiaries, providing relief to individuals and couples, the previously apolitical SSA stated in an email circulated on Thursday. Well, I mean, Doge destroyed any ability of it to be apolitical. So, of course, it's political now. Frank Bizzigano, the commissioner of the agency, said in a statement that nearly 90% of Social Security beneficiaries will no longer pay federal income taxes on their benefits. This is a historic step forward for America's seniors, Bizzigano said. By significantly reducing the tax burden on benefits, this legislation reaffirms President Trump's promise to protect Social Security and helps ensure that seniors can better enjoy the retirement they've earned. However, the spending bill does not actually eliminate federal taxes on Social Security due to the rule constraints of passing a bill this way, through the reconciliation process to avoid a Democratic filibuster. Not to mention, if we keep cutting everybody's taxes, I mean, granted, he's giving money to the ultra wealthy, but still, the fact that we're cutting taxes means that the deficit is going to go up. So, is it even a good thing? Instead, the legislation provides a temporary tax deduction of up to $6,000 for people aged 65 and older, and $12,000 for married seniors. These benefits will start to phase out for those with incomes of more than $75,000 and married couples of more than $150,000. Previous SSA officials said that the Trump administration's framing of the bill was misleading. People are like, is this real? Is this a scam? Because it's not what they signed up for, Kathleen Romig, a former senior advisor to the SSA during the Biden administration, told CNN. It doesn't sound like normal government communications, official communications. It sounds like, partisan. Well, considering, who Trump puts in these agencies' places, of course it's partisan. Jeff Nesbitt, who served as a top SSA official under Republican and Democratic presidents, posted on X, "The agency has never issued a blatant political statement. The fact that Trump and his minions running SSA has done this is unconscionable." The New Jersey representative Frank Pallone, the top Democrat on the House Energy and Commerce Committee, wrote on X that every word of the SSA's email on Thursday is a lie. "This big, ugly bill doesn't change that," Pallone wrote. "It's disturbing to see Trump hijack a public institution to push blatant information." Wait a minute. We're surprised at this point that he's doing that? I'm sorry, what? I would actually be surprised if he didn't do that. Okay, so that is the end of that article, and I think I forgot to mention that this is from The Guardian. So that is the end of that article. So now let's talk about immigration. And I'm not going to talk about it in relation to the big, beautiful bill, even though I probably could have found an article about how they are increasing the budget of ICE, so it's the largest law enforcement agency in the country. Or I could point out that they now want to use detained immigrants because not all of them are here as undocumented. Some of them are here legally. He wants to use them as slave labor. Oh, we got rid of all these deported all these undocumented workers who are picking fruit. So our fruit is about to rot. Well, let's just send these prisoners to the fields and make them do the work. So, yeah, Trump wants to bring back the chain gang. So anyway, this is from CNN. Law used to kick out Nazis could be used to strip citizenship from many more Americans. I mean, if you can read that headline and not be chilled, then you're probably a fascist because you probably think that it's not going to apply to you, so who cares? Because, what fascists and unfortunately way too many Republicans have in common is the lack of empathy. I even posted a meme on my community post about how this might not affect me, but that's not why I'm against it, because I actually have empathy for the people who will lose their benefits. All right. Just make sure this is big enough for me to read. Yes. Oh, my eyes. For decades, the U.S. Department of Justice has used a tool to snuff out former Nazis who lied their way into becoming American citizens, a law that allowed the department to denaturalize or strip citizenship from criminals who falsified their records or hid their illicit pasts. That power under the new Trump administration may be broadening. According to a memo issued by the Justice Department last month, attorneys should aim their denaturalization work to target a much broader swath of individuals, anyone who may pose a potential danger to national security. Okay, that's clear as mud. The directive appears to be a push towards a larger denaturalization effort that fits with the Trump administration's hardline immigration policies. These could leave some of the millions of naturalized American citizens at risk of losing their status and being deported. People who have committed violent crimes, are members or associates of gangs and drug cartels, or have committed fraud should also be prioritized, the memo issued by the head of the DOJ's Civil Division said. But for many officials and experts, their real concern, they say, is that it is designed to strike fear in the hearts of legal immigrants across the country, particularly those who are at odds with Trump himself. Like, say, the Democratic candidate for New York City mayor. The politicization of citizenship rights is something that really worries me. I think it's just flatly inconsistent with our democratic system, Cassandra Burke Robertson, a law professor at Case Western Reserve University, told CNN. The statute in question is part of a McCarthy-era law first established to root out communists during the Red Scare. but its most common use over the years has been against war criminals. In 1979, the Justice Department established a unit that used the statute to deport hundreds of people who assisted the Nazis. Eli Rosenbaum, the man who led it for years, helped the department strip citizenship or deport 100 people and earned a reputation as the DOJ's most prolific Nazi hunter. Rosenbaum briefly returned in 2022 to lead an effort to identify and prosecute anyone who committed war crimes in Ukraine. But the department has broadened those efforts beyond Nazis several times, including an Obama-era initiative called Operation Janus, targeting those who stole identities to earn citizenship. In 2020, Trump attempted to expand denaturalization efforts by creating a dedicated office at the Justice Department, but it was quietly disbanded by the Biden administration the following year. One former DOJ official called the office a branding opportunity, noting that it was not particularly effective and did not fit with Trump's successor's priorities. Since returning to the White House, Trump has worked to redesign how the federal government enforces immigration in the country, pushing agencies like the FBI and U.S. Marshals to join deportation efforts and targeting foreign student visas for people abroad hoping to attend a private university in the States. Instead of reinstating the standalone office from his first administration, the entire civil division is now being told to prioritize denaturalization in all cases permitted by law, according to the memo, which also suggests that U.S. attorneys' offices across the country should flag cases where they may be able to initiate denaturalization proceedings. Trump filed 102 denaturalization cases during his first administration, contrasted with the 24 cases under Biden. DOJ spokesperson Chad Gilmartin said on social media Wednesday. So far, the second Trump administration has filed 5 cases in its first 5 months. The DOJ told CNN in a statement, denaturalization proceedings will only be pursued as permitted by law and supported by evidence against individuals who illegally procured or misrepresented facts in the naturalization process. You know, it would be so much easier to believe that they actually give a shit about the law if they weren't making shit up about Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Because first, it was a mistake to deport him. Then suddenly he's a gang member. Now he's not only a gang member, he's a human trafficker and a wife beater. Because they brought him back to the States just so they would have an excuse to have what they hope is a show trial. So they can deport him again and then point to everybody and say, see, we did it correctly. And we were right to get rid of him the first time. But current and former DOJ officials who spoke to CNN said that beyond instructing lawyers to file as many denaturalization cases as possible, the memo is so broad that it could allow the Justice Department to invoke vague or unsubstantiated claims to expel people from the country. Robertson of Case Western warned that the memo could give way to the Trump administration retroactively searching for missteps in the naturalization process of perceived political opponents like student activists. Irina Monta, a law professor at Hofstra University, said that the administration's move could have a chilling effect on free speech, both political and otherwise. I regularly observe the fear firsthand, she said. Trump has publicly flirted with the notion of deporting American citizens he doesn't want in the country. Though the seriousness of these statements is highly unclear, he has called for everything from deporting bad people, many of them who were born in our country, to saying his administration should take a look at removing Elon Musk after his erstwhile ally criticized the president's spending bill. Granted, I would find it funny if he deported Elon, but at the same time, yeah, if he can deport Elon, he's going to deport a lot of other people who don't have Elon's resources. And just think of that. He wants to deport people who were born in this country. That is just chilling. I think I've mentioned it a few times in these types of videos. When I was born, my parents only had a green card. They were not yet citizens. I was obviously under birthright citizenship. I am an American citizen. But I'm vocal against Trump. As I said, he could go back and see I was born when my parents, they had legal status. They were green card holders, but they weren't citizens. And I've seen comments where people only see actual citizens as belonging in this country, not permanent residents, not green card holders. Apparently, they think that citizenship is something you should gain outside the country and then come in once you are fully citizens. Ignoring the fact that I think that in order to become a citizen, you have to be a legal resident first. And how the hell can you do that if you're living abroad? But whatever. At least one ally has taken a more formal step. Last week, Andy Ogles, a Republican congressman, asked Attorney General Pam Bondi to investigate whether New York City mayoral candidate Zohran Mamdani, who was born in Uganda and naturalized in 2018, should be subject to denaturalization proceedings because he publicly glorifies people connected to Hamas in a rap song. Okay. Bondi has not publicly responded to the letter, which is probably the first smart thing she's done. Okay, so that is the end of that article, and I believe I am actually done with this video. Oh, look, it's only a little under an hour and a half. Considering how many articles I went through, I'm surprised that it didn't hit 2 hours. So anyway, I believe I've covered everything I wanted to in this article. If you guys have any other issues with this bill or other issues you want me to cover, if you have a specific article, just post it in the comments, or you just want me to look up the issue and pick an article myself, I can do that as well. So with that, I will see you guys in the next video.